To begin graphing this function t of x, I'm going to start by labeling my x and y axes. And since we have a domain from 0 to 2 pi, we would obviously start at 0, and at the end, it will be 2 pi. That means if I count the ticks, halfway between 0 and 2 pi would be pi. And then it would also be wise to label what's halfway between 0 and pi, which is pi over 2, and halfway between pi and 2 pi, which is 3 pi over 2. All right, now as for the y-axis, or t of x, I think it would just make sense to go up one at a time. There we go. Now, looking at t of x, I think the easiest way to start would be to notice the plus 2 at the end. That represents our d value, which is known as the vertical shift, aka the midline. So that means if I draw the line at y equals 2, this is going to represent our midline. Okay, now the other important information we're given is our a value in this equation, which is equal to 3, and a represents the amplitude. Visually, the amplitude is the distance from the midline to a maximum point, as well as the distance from the midline to a minimum. So that means our maximum values, So our max values will be along the line y equals 5, and our min values will be 3 less than 2, which is -1. So along here will be our minimums. Now the next piece of information we can figure out is the period. And we're going to use this b value, which is the coefficient in front of x, to help us do that, because we know the formula that the period is equal to 2 pi over b. So if we calculate it out, 2 pi over 2 is equal to pi. So that means we have a period of pi. Now the last piece of information you should know is that because this is a sinusoidal function, it's going to start moving upwards from the y-axis. So it'll go something like that, right? And I know it's going to start at 2 right here, because that's our midline. And since we know now that the period has the value of pi, that means the time it takes for it to repeat itself, so to go from here to here, is a distance of pi. So at pi, I know at pi comma 2, that point there is going to be on this graph. And then similarly, if I add another pi to that, so 2 pi, it's going to intersect the midline right there. The next piece of information we can figure out is half of the period. So half the period will again be at where the midline is, and it's going to be half of pi. So pi over 2 and 2, I know that's going to be on the midline. And then similarly at 3 pi over 2, the same thing is going to happen. So hopefully now you can kind of see what's going to happen. It's going to start moving up to a maximum here, which would be halfway between pi and pi over 2. And then it would move down through there to a minimum right there, back up to there, down, and finish moving back up, just like that. All right, now we're all finished. And just so you know, technically, yes, we could have done this with the graphing calculator, but you would have to be very careful with how you set your window settings to make sure you draw it properly. So I just wanted to show you how you can do it without a calculator. So that's it for this video, and thanks for visiting JD's Preparation.